Hey there! Today I wanted to talk to you about lifting weights. And I know this is a bit of a far start from the whole PhD angle, but I have something in mind, so just bear with me. The occasion is that at the time of recording this video, I'm a bit over around a year of working with a personal trainer. I think for this whole thing to make sense, I have to tell you a bit about kind of like my relationship to lifting and kind of, my story with the gym. So, growing up, I did a lot of fencing. I fenced for 7 years. I absolutely loved it. I'm left-handed, so that is an advantage in that sport, and I absolutely loved it. But then, it kind of came between choosing between school and fencing, and then I also injured out of it, so it was just like, it had to take a back burner. And then I was looking for another sport. I was never really a team player in the classical sense. Like, I just didn't really enjoy team sports. Most of them involve balls, and I am not very good with any kind of like ball based sport. So basketball, football, like I was never really my vibe. So I was like, okay, I have to move somehow, so I guess I will go to the gym. And that was almost like, 7 years ago by now. I kept lifting on and on in the last 7 years. I tried, I went through all the loops that you can imagine. I started like being a complete noob in the gym, never lifted anything before. I did that for about a year, like once a week or something, in like an empty high school class. And then I found CrossFit, and like it looked so cool and so dynamic. So I did CrossFit for like 2 years ballpark. And then I was like, okay, CrossFit is cool, but there's a bit too much like sweating and feeling like I'm gonna throw up. But I really liked weightlifting, so then I joined the weightlifting club at our university. But then I didn't really vibe with the style of training in weightlifting because it's very technical sport, and I just wanted to like push myself really hard. I even did a powerlifting competition with them, which is very funny, because I was like 67 kilos at the time. So I wasn't particularly strong, but I did a powerlifting competition. And then afterwards, once that kind of like died down, then I just like quit the weightlifting club, and then I just went and started like being a regular gym goer. So if you are a regular gym goer yourself, you know that the main question that everybody always asks: what do I do in the gym? This can be relating to like the split you do, how many days a week you train, how do you split up the body parts you train, what exercises to do, what rep ranges you do. You do 3 sets of 5 or 4 sets of 10, and all of this. It's a huge mess. And as you can probably guess by my PhD, or like the fact that I am doing a PhD, and just like me as a person, I went absolute ham. Like, researching lifting became like a hobby for me. Like, really going deep, reading papers, consuming an ungodly amount of content on YouTube and Instagram and podcasts, which will be important later on, about lifting and physiology and anatomy and how to make this, how to optimize everything. I was like full on like trying to optimize everything with regards to lifting. Now, if you ever try to optimize anything without clear benchmarks, you know that it's a struggle. Especially, I feel like the online space around fitness is particularly prone to this, because it's very hard to know when you are doing the right thing, because everything just takes so long. People just make very convincing arguments, and you're like, oh my god, what if I've been doing it wrong? And a year from now, like, you would need to keep doing what you do for a year to decide whether it worked or not. But most people are like, oh my god, I don't have a year, but that guy has 9 abs, so I'm gonna listen to him, Or, oh, that guy squats 600 pounds, so I'm gonna take his advice. And I was full on in this hamster wheel. That's the word. I thought it was mouse wheel. That's weird, because in Hungarian it's squirrel wheel. Yeah, I don't know. So I was in this hamster wheel for a good while. And it was a huge struggle. I kept, redesigning my program. Okay, maybe I lift like 4 days. Like, okay, maybe I do 5. Maybe I split it up like upper lower. Maybe it's like push pull legs, but then it's not 5. But oh my god, what am I gonna do? It was just a huge mess, and I was struggling a lot with it. Now, this was all well and good during my studies, because I was a pretty efficient student, and I just had a bit more free time, so I could afford to spend all this time and energy on researching lifting and like worrying about my lifting program. And then the PhD started, and that did not go particularly well. A PhD is difficult, especially in the beginning. It's terrifying, it's new, it's busy, you're exhausted, you're stressed out of your mind, and I just noticed that I was stressing so much about the PhD by default that I just did not have any energy left over to think about training. And I was constantly unhappy with the program I had, and it was just like not working. And that led to me kind of like missing workouts, skipping workouts, and just like I just was not really lifting anymore. And one thing I learned over the years is that lifting is just very important for kind of like my well-being. I could say the mental health, but I think it's a bit broader than that. Although, it ties together. So I just knew that I need to go on walks, and I need to go to the gym, and I need to journal and call my family regularly. Like, these just have to be in the schedule somewhere for me to feel good. And I wasn't lifting, and I wasn't feeling good. So something got to give. So I mentioned that I consumed a lot of content, and the main content that I consumed for years was the RX Radio podcast by the Prescript crew. I will link them in the description because I love what they do. I listened to that podcast religiously since episode 1, which I think was in like 2015, 2016, something like that. Now they are at like 600 episodes, something like that. Through the podcast, I watched their whole company kind of grew into what it is today. And it was a super inspiring story from like the build a business perspective. And I also learned an ungodly amount about lifting. And as their crew kind of grew out, I started kind of being familiar with people that they had on the podcast, that they had like on their Instagram and whatnot. And most of the people that kind of like are in a company built around fitness education are coaches, right? That makes perfect sense. So this was the first moment when I started to think about getting a coach. It was always like a wish of mine. I was like, how cool it would be if I would have kind of the means or the luxury of having a coach. So for years, I kind of like dreamed about having a coach, but it wasn't really a serious consideration. I think in my mind, like getting a coach, like the fantasies about getting a coach was closer to like having a lightsaber, Like if you watched Star Wars as a kid, you had dreams about how cool it would be to have a lightsaber. To me, like a coach was like that, It's something that completely unattainable and unreasonable, but it would be really nice. Cut back to the present moment a year ago in my PhD, when I was super, super burnt out with lifting and life, and it was just not working. And that was the moment when I realized like, maybe I actually should get a coach. And that was the first moment when I considered it seriously. Now, I had a lot of feelings around getting a coach, because the first one was kind of like an imposter syndrome, because the main thing was like, who am I to get a coach, right? I'm not a professional athlete. Like, I lift for fun. Like, who am I to pay another human a substantial amount of money to tell me how to lift weights or like what to lift, like it felt like such an imposter syndrome. And I struggled with this for quite a while. But then, after talking it over with some friends and family, everyone was like, just try, and then you can see. So I put away 3 months of coaching worth of money, and I pulled the trigger on signing with a coach. Now, I signed with a coach who I knew from the Prescript crew. I will put his Instagram into the description. Eric Bugera, absolute goat. He's the best. Just go to his Instagram. He does these big Q&As. You can ask him anything about lifting. The guy is insanely smart, and his takes are absolutely immaculate. So I followed his stuff for years before actually kind of like reaching out to him about like coaching. And like how he approached lifting just really resonated with me, which I think is pretty important when you want to kind of like work with someone long term. And I reached out to him. I explained myself, over-explained myself pretty hard, like, oh my god, this is the situation, whatever. And then he was super cool. And then exactly a year ago, we started working together. Now, an extra layer of complication in this whole lifting journey was my low back. I have a pretty bad low back. I have a herniated discs and another one which is like almost herniated. It's called a circular protrusion. So I had some pretty bad back pain. At the time especially, it was absolutely terrible. But then I started working with Eric. It's like your hip function kind of gets messed up, and then your gait as you walk gets messed up, and like just everything just like is not great. And it took quite a while to work through that with him, kind of like restoring hip function, teaching good movement patterns. And it's been like a long process, but I got out of pain. which is great. So now my back doesn't hurt all the time, which is great. I even managed to ski last week with it, which I wasn't sure if I ever can do again. So I was super grateful about that. And, I also made sick gains, and that's just like super nice, like see yourself progress and push myself. It's always nice to feel. And working with Eric also taught me a lot about kind of like stress and when to push yourself, because I had a lot of conversations with him about kind of like this feeling of being very stressed and worn down, right? Because like I have a pretty stressful job, right? As a PhD, like I stress about stuff. I also am quite neurotic as a person, so I stressed a lot on general. And because of that, I very often felt that I wasn't recovering proper. I had a trash night of sleep. Like, everything feels a little sore and a little achy, and like it's not really good. And I asked him, like, what's his take? Like, should I push through, or should I just, like if I have a bad night of sleep, should I just push through and go to the gym anyway, or should I just like skip a session and then just like try to recover more? And then he just pointed out that in his experience, 90% of the time, when you really feel like you're worn down and you don't want to go lift, it's mostly psychological and very rarely physiological. And I really took that to heart, because ever since that, my default assumption is that like I wake up and I feel, cranky and whatever, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go to the gym, put on some loud music, smash some caffeine, get some carbs in, and then I'm gonna start lifting as if everything is fine. And I had sessions when it was genuinely physiology, and I just like cut it short after 2 warm-up sets. But more often than not, it was fine. And I just had to push through that psychological barrier where my body just really didn't want me to get into the cold morning. And I feel like that was a very valuable lesson to learn for me, because it meant that even when I'm stressed, because that's when you feel like you're under recovered and worn down, I just kept lifting. And that just helped me so much to kind of cope with the stress, because I had that hour and a half of me time. I just have my music on, I'm pushing myself, I'm sweating. And keeping that on the books constantly just went a really, really long way for me. So this is when we start tying into the whole PhD thing, and how like this journey with a coach, with Eric, affected this whole PhD thing for me. I think what I just mentioned is probably the biggest one, is that I just had this extra bit of push and accountability to not skip sessions and to keep moving and keep lifting even when I was really, really stressed. And I never thought that I would need kind of accountability help when it came to lifting, because I really enjoy lifting. But it turned out that this little extra push when I was feeling trash just went a super, super long way on getting me to actually get the thing done and get, some movement in. We know very well, we as in science, that movement just goes a really long way in kind of your well-being. The second thing, how it affected my PhD, was really like this handing the reins over effect and removing the mental load of having to think about my training. So, lifting is a really important part of my life, even as a hobbyist, right? I just really enjoy it, and it's just like, it's something that's very close to me. And removing a layer of constant frustration from it was such a mental relief that I can't even describe the feeling, how nice it was. That like now I just know that I can just reach into my phone and there is a spreadsheet and I don't have to think about it, because I just have full 100% confidence that Eric knows what's best. And I will just do what he says, and I can just go there, open the spreadsheet, and get sweating. And it's so nice. You have absolutely no idea. And kind of like the meta principle, which often comes up in conversations with people who go to the gym, is the sense of agency that comes with the gym. And what I mean by that is that you will have stressful periods in your life, right? It's just like, it's completely inevitable. And if you go to the gym regularly, it's kind of a constant exposure to something that's difficult, right? Because like lifting is difficult, but by collecting these small exposures, first of all, you just get a bit better at, how I got better at just like getting out the door in the morning, even when I felt a bit worn down. It helps you get better at this. But even when you cannot just suck it up, whatever is going on in your life, for me, kind of having the agency is like, okay, my experiments might have went to trash, my manuscript might have went sideways, but I still can go to the gym and turn it all off for an hour and a half, is such a big deal. And it helped me so much in kind of like coping with the inevitable roller coaster that is research, and especially that is a PhD research. Now, I see that I've been recording for 19 and a half minutes by now. I will see how short I can edit this down. Because and I have notes. Can you imagine how long it took to write these notes? You have no idea. But basically, I think the bottom line I want to point out is that coaching is a luxury good. And there is absolutely no doubt about this, right? Because it's an extra expense that you have to pay for on the monthly. And I think this held me back for way too long because, realistically, like it's also an investment in my well-being. So for me, while it is a luxury good, and I'm quite aware of the privileged position that I am in now, that I can afford it and I can budget it in, I also know for after this year that I would go to quite great lengths to budget it into to my monthly expenses to be able to have this, because the aggregate positive effect it had on my life is just absolutely immense. So if you are like me, like I was a year ago, and you feel like this is something that you want to explore, and and you feel drawn to this idea, I would very much encourage you to like consider it a bit more seriously and like try to see whether you can, make the finances meet, because the whole experience for me was absolutely life changing. Thanks for hanging out. Thanks for listening to the ramble. I will see you next time.